Welcome everyone. Welcome in this webinar, Design for Life. Thanks for joining. We are really happy to have you and also Jeroen in this webinar. So Jeroen Spoelstra is the founder of Life-Centered Design School and one of the pioneers in life-centered design. And during this webinar, we'll get to know more about it if you're not familiar yet. So he uses his experience of living in nature in Spanish Pyrenees and over 15 years of experience in design and education in an educational context to bring his knowledge about life-centered design. My name is Marianne, and I'm basically also a design thinker and really interested in helping company move from just making product and services for humans to regenerating nature. And just before we start, Jeroen, I think you would like to share with us some special sound for us to listen to.
Yes.
Before we discuss further.
Thank you, Marianne, for inviting me and to everyone for joining this webinar. Yeah, before we start the conversation, we're gonna have a little listen to something. One thing that I kind of believe in, that we should slow down our design process, hence less design sprints and more design walks. And that will happen automatically when you live in nature, I can tell you. This is where I live, together with my wife and kids. It's a little village in the foothills of the Spanish Pyrenees. And we live there with 30 people. And we have a beautiful mountain lake about 40 minutes drive from us. And I would like to start this conversation to kind of by listening to this lake for a few minutes.
Hello there, I'm Ibon de Plan, also known as Paso de la Mora. Welcome. I am a glacial lake, which means I've been here since prehistorical times. If I tell you the pine cones are actually flowers that resemble their cone-bearing ancestors, you'll understand that I've been here for a long time. The 430-kilometer long mountain chain of the Pyrenees you can see around me was formed 65 million years ago by the collision of the tiny Iberian and the Eurasian plate. I'm of service. My surface reflects the sky, the mountains, and the trees around. I'm never alone. I have a significant role here. I host an entire ecosystem, from the microorganisms and frogs that live in my waters to the cattle and animals that come to drink me. My rocks protect the lizards that live under and the moss that resides on top. My trees need to be solid and resistant to hold the soil. So you see, we protect each other. It's a very delicate balance to maintain. I'm the first cut pine you see when you arrive here. I heard you coming on my pebbles. Because I'm so exposed, nobody dares to be against my bark. These are my kids. They grow under my wings. Here, my friends live and die. And when they do, you could say I reuse their bodies. And I produce a lot of mud. Most humans don't really like it, especially girls. We are a community. And to be healthy, the balance of all forms of life living within me must be too. Just as bacteria in your gut manage your digestion, the planktons and other microorganisms living within me enable the cycles of nature. Nowadays, I'm even part of Instagram pictures. But sometimes I feel like humans only see me as expendable, an add-on to the place that doesn't move, live, or breathe. But I do. My lungs are the mountains from which I draw the snow that composes my mass. My legs are all the path I take to arrive at the delta of the Ebro. I have a direction indeed, and a reason to exist. I am not an accessory, and I'm actually the reason why you are coming. Look at me. Sometimes I would like you to see me. Can't you see the ripples and waves I form? How perfect are they? Isn't it relaxing to look at me? My waves are like a massage to the little creatures inside me. Can't you see? I create peace around me. Rivulets carry granite rocks, and pebbles tickle me. We meet every day and laugh together. Look at me, I'm laughing, can't you hear? Connect with me. I am a natural obstacle that forces you to slow down and go around me. You cannot not see me. You have to stop and choose which way to go and which path to follow. Will you go left or will you go right? When you come with your electric mountain bike, you drive so fast you don't see me. When you leave your trash and swim inside my waters, you're poisoning me with your human creams and sunscreens, leaving a chemical print that will take decades to disappear. If I had a voice, I would ask you, little human, to protect me. My nature needs time to regenerate. I feel so weak already. The views and peace you enjoy are a privilege I'm glad to bless you with. But please, not all at the same time. Droughts and fire are my biggest fears. Can you make the signs clear and ensure that other humans like you won't harm me? I am not sure if I'm very well. I don't know what's wrong with me. I would like to have my health tested.
So we created this non-human persona last year as part of a project where we want to kind of like understand the impact of tourism where I live. It's a pretty popular place among Spanish tourists and French tourists. And this lake especially is and what you hear was like the story of the lake, but it's not just kind of the storytelling that's part of it. It's also, we combined it with scientific research that's being carried out through the Pyrenees by a climate research institute. They really kind of combine the data they found and the emotional connection we kind of created between us and the lake.
Jeroen, could you share maybe why, where does it come from, and why we should empathize with the lake?
Why we should? So for me, like when I started with lifestyle design, I was like, there's everywhere scientific research around us that tells us that has kind of like, hey, we're kind of screwing up the planet. And I believe that design is also part of like screwing up the planet. What could we flip that around? So there's a lot of scientific evidence, but there's no action. And it's maybe also because it's scientific evidence and it's not kind of translated to normal wording or like emotion that kind of like people can relate with. So how can I combine that? And that's kind of like, for me, was like by kind of creating some sort of like emotional story of in this case the lake that can share his or her or its feelings. And it's not about that I want to personify the lake. It's about that I want to kind of connect with the lake on an emotional level, with the idea that maybe helps to kind of get us moving into action. So that's why I created this lake, or this kind of persona. And to me, it's already the process of doing it. So now we just listen to it, but it's also like the process of doing it kind of also helps me to kind of get into understanding kind of like the impact we have as humans on our surroundings, on our world.
Mm-hmm. So before we go and move on to what is a persona, what is a non-human persona, which is central to what we just heard, could you tell us a little bit about what is actually life-centered design, so that we know more globally the topic?
Yeah. To me, life-centered design is design beyond human needs. Like traditionally, we're only focused on designing for users in the broadest sense of the word, either products or services, experiences, organizations. Even if we design sustainably, it always goes about like our own lives, but we never include like nature, the natural resources. So what I want to do is give nature, the biological ecosystems, a voice in the design process. and the non-users, the communities. They also often forgotten. Like often we design for a user or we design for society, but there's nothing in between. There's nothing happening. So lives in design focus on including those elements in the design process. So we look through an ecosystem perspective, and that ecosystem has a human part and a nature part.
And why do you think that we actually need it? Why is it important?
I think it's important to start realizing as designers that that if we want to change the way we want to I'm not saying we design safe the world, but if we want to change the way we design our products in a more regenerative or sustainable way, we have to include nature, because that's part of we destroyed nature, so let's include it in our design process. Because if we don't look into those perspectives, then nothing's going to change. So if we only keep on doing humans and design, we're going to keep on using too many resources.
So maybe can you say a few words about human-centered design, just in case some people are not aware of it?
Yeah, so human-centered design, or it's also called design thinking, is really focused on the empathy for the end user, or the empathy for a problem owner, and solving those problems or the needs, and it's kind of a very iterative process. And I think in its intention, why IDEO, one of the bigger global design agencies, start with put human-centered design on the agenda, or it was used as a more holistic process, but now it's really focused, I think, a lot of the time on digital solutions. So though it's called still human-centered design, it's very much focused around the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a very narrow perspective at the moment.
So that's why you host webinars and courses on how to shift from human-centered design to life-centered design. So are there other differences from a methodology to the other?
Yeah, I think human-centered design, what you said, is it's really focused on the user needs, and it's basically more at what people want. And life-centered design is more focused on what's actually needed, to move a problem forward, or to work, for example, around biodiversity, or how can we create a regenerative furniture company. And life design really focuses on the long term. So it's just what we need to do things now, but what does it do in over future generations? We have a more holistic approach to it, that's including the whole ecosystem. I always talk about less life and more life. I feel everything we do when it comes to design, or most of the things, is to make our life more convenient, which it results in us humans doing less, because everything is just you order everything to your phone, either your meal, the product you buy, everything, and I want to bring life back into life. With life and design, it's more about hey, being responsible for your own, maybe for your own gardening, for your own food, or for your own entertainment. Where we live in this little village, there's no shopping streets, there's no cinema, there's no theater. So we created ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Way more be more responsible, and we're more intentional with the things we design and with the things we do in our lives.
What would be an example of a project that has been led in life-centered design? So
one project we did was here in the local community. We have a big it's this European Natura 2000 project, which is this patchworks of nature that's left in Europe. And we have quite a big, I think 1/3 almost is Natura 2000 here in Sobrero, where we live. But it's not closed off. It's there's people living there. It's agriculture happens, tourism happens. So the question we got from the town hall is, how can we make this Natura 2000 reserve thrive even more, but how can it also then includes like kind of the benefit of the community and like can be beneficial for the economy. So what we organized basically was like a co-design session where we invited all the different like actors in the area. So that could be that people that are hunters, but people that are against hunting, normal tourism, ecotourism, representatives of nature and like NGOs that kind of like protect nature. So we interviewed all of them beforehand to understand what their concerns were. Based on that, we came up with like 3 different questions to kind of explore ideas around. So one was about like how can, it's always kind of like how can we help nature thrive, and kind of how can the community be part of that? How can we kind of like give also space for the economy to thrive? That goes beyond just kind of endless tourism or endless agriculture, but are there other ways to do that? And we're actually kind of last week, we talked again with the mayor, and the idea is to kind of continue this kind of co-design sessions, but more specific on like some topics that are concerned now in the region. For example, the drought in Spain and France has the same problem.
So what would be the end product of these discussions and dialogues?
I'm not sure if that would be like an end product. It could be like an ongoing change. Because like how, like I think it would be kind of like what could be how could we kind of like protect the biodiversity we have, and how maybe even kind of grow it. That's not fixed with one thing. There's maybe a bigger picture, that like a bigger project, a bigger dream we have, and then there will be smaller projects that kind of like help move that. Like could be education around farming, maybe like, hey, how do you kind of like, what's the landscape of different farmers that are here, and who are like more regenerative and who are more traditional, and what could we learn from each other? And how can you kind of include maybe science about when it's come to water preservation, those kind of things.
So it's more like an ongoing process. And
yeah, it's not like like there might be finalized designs, but there's also kind of like an ongoing design project, which kind of asks for different type of facilitation also.
So what type of facilitation? What do you mean?
Well, I think traditionally we're kind of used to, when we facilitate a project or like a session, it's about like a very clear start and a very clear end. And maybe lifestyle design is more about like a little, not per se like you start maybe with one question, but like there's a lot of things around this one question, but the end might be very open.
Even more questions.
Yeah, with more questions. Or more actions to take, and not kind of one fix. So what my experience now with lifestyle design is, you never work on one problem. If you work on biodiversity and you include these different stakeholders or these different actors, all these different actors have different problems. You could like, and you have to kind of work on them, like in togetherness or like separation, but like kind of like make sure that they kind of like you answer to them all.
So basically that relates to personas, which is very related to design thinking. So what are personas and what are non-human personas?
Okay.
You say more.
A persona you use, I think, when for design thinking or for service design, a persona helps you, is kind of like a representation of your ideal user or ideal customer, and then you design your product towards that, or your solution towards this persona. And then you kind of design customer journeys, and you can like lay that persona next to that customer journey, and you can see like where in the journey he or she is happy. But that's kind of very much based on not per se on science. It's more it's like on user research and on design research. To me, the non-human persona is more focused on the scientific part, really understanding kind of like from a biological perspective, kind of like how does this ecosystem of this glacial lake work? What does the glacial lake need kind of like from a biological perspective? How are we destroying it as humans? You can look at it from like a tourist perspective, from a local perspective. What are you seeing? From like an industry perspective and from a global perspective. So swimming in the lake will, with our like human creams, will damage the biological balance of the chemical balance of the lake if you do that too much. But you could maybe also look from like a Airbnb and booking.com perspective to the lake and say like, hey, like there's so many tourists in this area, more in the broader area, and this is a very this lake attracts a lot of people. Maybe booking.com and Airbnb should say like, this is already very busy, not because of the hotels are full, because nature is full. So please don't go here, and maybe go look for somewhere like another place. Maybe they can advise a place that's more quiet. But then you can also look at a global industrial view when it comes to global climate change. Investing from banks into kind of fossil fuel things, you know, like that also has an effect on this lake.
In what sense?
In the sense that like we're so connected, you know, like the fact that like all these big industries kind of like send out so much kind of like CO2 in the air.
Okay.
You know, there's no boundaries between like the air in France and the air in Spain, for example.
And you say how important it was to have scientific data, but also to connect emotionally. So I was wondering, where does it come from, and where did it come from for you? What made you start all of this and put so much importance on this emotional connection? I
think it starts from my practice as a designer. You know, like one of the what could design do? Like if a lot of design is kind of creating products that we don't really need, maybe, or and that do a lot of damage to our environment. So what types of like design or creativity can we use to kind of like then work kind of help it for good? And to me, that storytelling part comes in there. Like, and this is like this audio file is just one way of storytelling. But it could also be a video, could be a drawing, could be a magazine. You know, and that's maybe also the difference between a normal persona that often ends up with like some sort of canvas or like a thing that's filled in. And I would like to inspire users, creators of non-human personas to kind of use their creativity more. Like kind of what ways can we connect? You know, can it be a play? And I'm not like an actor, so that's not going to be me, but like maybe someone else. You know, like let's use our creativity to really help nature forward.
And could you
local communities?
Can you tell us maybe a little bit more in detail what would be the steps if there were a methodology or a process? What would you start with? And is it really related to the design thinking steps, or is it different?
The lifestyle design, or the creating the non-human personas?
I was moving to more life-centered design, but yeah, we could have
steps would be related to kind of Okay, let's start with the whole so it's yes, it's related to kind of design thinking and human-centered design, but to me it's basically two big steps. It's first part is like understanding the ecosystem, and that includes also kind of creating these personas. You know, like mapping out the whole ecosystem in some sort of mind map, figuring out kind of what are these different perspectives and point of views in this ecosystem, creating personas around that, and creating these design challenges. And then it's kind of designing with life, you know, co-design with nature and these communities in mind. When they cannot be here, you know, but with you, kind of make sure that they're like kind of that you kind of use resources to kind of get ideas from there. and really more intentional, do experiments or iterate to kind of see if your solutions you come up with really work, or the strategies. So I think in that sense, like all design processes are kind of similar. But what you really should think about is kind of what's the impact when you bring your design to life. You know, and that's also not maybe where designers are the strongest at, like kind of like making that business, or kind of bringing the design into the real world. But that's a very important part.
And reading through the literature that already exists about life-centered design, what struck me is also to ask yourself, do we need this design? Is it useful to have it?
Yeah.
One question now is about how do you actually make a non-human persona? What are the steps that we need to keep in mind?
Well, what I do is before I start making the non-human persona, I kind of like look at what's the topic I'm working on and create like a mind map around that. And then, for example, we chose Vivant the plan. We're doing research first. So what's the lake? Can we find more about glacial lakes, kind of like science, what's the state of these glacial lakes in the Pyrenees, how it is in the Pyrenees. And then we also look into tourism, how many people come there, how do they come there, like looking all in these kind of like more in-depth research. And then you kind of want to kind of write down basically what you do with an empathy map or a normal persona is kind of write down the pains and the needs. And the needs are more kind of natural. What do they need to kind of like survive and thrive? And the pains are more like what damage are we doing to them? And like what are the struggles? And to me, it really helps then to kind of visualize that data. And so like how to visualize the data in a kind of inspiring way, or like if you find like graphs online, you use them, or graphs in your research. And then it's good to understand if this persona is thriving or if it's critical. And that's basically on the data side. And then we transfer it into kind of a storytelling. So by going through all this kind of research, you're trying to kind of figure out like what's the story that kind of this non-human persona, non-human actant is telling us. So mostly that's first just writing down in general kind of what that is, and then like from there we create an audio file, but you can create something else. And we want to understand what's the impact on the negative side. What impact do we have as humans on this persona, and what positive impact could we have in the future? That's kind of roughly how.
That's interesting to see, not just to keep on the negative side and not only in the present, is also how to propel yourself in the future and see how could we act, what can we do in the future.
Yeah, it gives maybe an initial ideas for a design challenge.
Mm-hmm. So basically you started this life-centered design school, and I think that you have people coming from far away, because this topic is triggering a lot of interest from many different areas. So what do you actually do in this school? What do you offer?
So we offer two things. It's like an online course that's about shifting from human-centered design to life-centered design. And the next one runs through June. And we help people kind of like in like 5 modules to kind of go through their own design project and combine it with like practical tips and like with some theory. We invite some experts in. That's one thing. And the other thing we do is a retreat. And that happens here in the Spanish Pyrenees. And that's more like a leadership life and design retreat, where we kind of work on a local project here from the area. And we do all the design work as much as we can outside. So we also go to this lake, we go to other beautiful places. And that really depends a little bit on what topic we're working on. So last project we worked on the bearded vulture, which is kind of a vulture that's almost extinct. So we really went to kind of its like breeding site to look there, to kind of like go to an eco-museum, talk with kind of locals to kind of like really understand kind of how this bird lives and survives and thrives.
And what do you think we need to connect in nature to be able to do some nice design? What does it bring more?
Well, nature makes you, if you sit down in nature, like we talked about last week, like when you can be alone in your office or in your apartment, and then you can feel really alone. But if you're alone in nature, you hardly feel alone because you're kind of safely surrounded by nature. Another thing is like a lot of the design work, when you do that in an office, you need an energizer to get in the right mood or in the right, like in nature, you don't really need that. You're already kind of set in the right tone. It's just very inspirational to be in nature and to be outside. I also think it helps to come up with different types of ideas. And it's about immersion. But so there's an EQ museum here. So we took our participants from the retreat in 2 weeks ago. We first took them to the museum to learn about the bird, this bearded vulture. And they said like only after we had the immersion in like into the valleys and in the canyons where they breed and where you see them fly, we could really have this image of this bird. So you really, it's, you know, like it helps you design, but it's also for me like in normal design life, in non-natural design life, for humans, you should go outside. You know, like don't stay stuck behind your computer. Go and meet the world, the outside world, because that's where you design for the outside world, and that's also where your products or services are living. I think that's kind of in general kind of a good idea to kind of just to be outside more as a designer.
And basically, it also helps to have all the senses open.
Yeah.
Like creativity is not only in our brain, so we can feel, hear, smell. And I guess it's, I don't have the scientific data, but I guess it really helps to be more focused and to be immersed, as you just said. Yeah. Do you have a final word just to close this session?
Final word. Oh, thank you for joining and for listening and coming up with all the interesting questions. Thank you for inviting me, Marianne. And I think we should all slow down our design processes and give it more intention.